This is the video I've wanted to make for over 10 years, but have only now been able to. Renowned pottery replicators Laurel and Paul Thornburg developed a unique way of firing pottery over 30 years ago. I first saw their big adobe kiln somewhere around 1993. It was about 20 years after that I first asked them if I could come over, get some pictures of the kiln, and find out about how it was made and fired. But the answer at that time was no. Now things have changed. The Thornburgs have completely retired from making pottery, and they've given me full access to their notes, their old photos, and their kiln. So today we go deep on the Thornburgs kiln, how it was made, how it was fired, and most importantly, how they reduced pottery in it. Let's get started. The potters of the ancient Mimbres culture that lived in southwestern New Mexico from about 1000 to 1130 AD are famous for their elaborate designs on their pottery. These were painted in red iron paint and then fired in a reduction atmosphere, turning those designs black. But archaeologists have no idea how they did this because they have found no evidence of any Mimbres pottery firings. The Thornburgs made some of the finest and most authentic Mimbres replicas ever produced. But in order to do that, they had to figure out how to reduce iron paint, like the Mimbres did. In the beginning, the Thornburgs pit-fired their Mimbres replicas, but it wasn't long before they were looking for a better way to do it. Starting along the banks of an arroyo near their home, they dug a deep vertical pit to put the pottery in, and then connected that with a horizontal shaft where the fire would go. This simple, primitive kiln was probably very similar to early pottery kilns around the world. They called it an earthen tunnel, and they found it could be used to fire oxidized pottery or reduced pottery very efficiently. They theorized that the ancient Mimbres potters could have used something similar built into the banks of arroyos just like they had done. If that had been the case, then centuries of rain and erosion would have eventually washed away all traces of these Mimbres earthen tunnel kilns, explaining why archaeologists can find no evidence of Mimbres pottery firings. In time, Paul and Laurel moved to a house without a convenient arroyo nearby. It was then, in the early 1990s, that they built the adobe kiln that still stands outside their house today. First, they made adobe bricks with a brick mold. Then they laid them up with mud mortar. The dimensions of the adobe kiln were made to be close to those of the earthen tunnel they had built into the arroyo bank previously. Here are the dimensions of that adobe kiln. The firing chamber is 24 inches wide and 30 inches deep. The firebox opening is 12 by 19 and is 3 feet deep and gently slopes down to the opening. From the floor of the firebox to the bottom of the firing chamber is 13 inches. I will attach a PDF with the kiln plans in the doobly-doo below in case you're interested in building your own on these dimensions. As I mentioned previously, similar kilns have been used in many places from ancient times clear up to today. Although here in the United States, kilns like this are extremely rare. But travel a few hours south of here into northern Mexico and you can still find kilns like this being used to fire pottery. In my research, however, this type of kiln is almost never used to fire in a reduction atmosphere. The Thornburgs developed a unique method, which they used to reduction fire hundreds of pots in their kiln over the course of almost 30 years. Here are the details of that method. They started out by stacking the pots carefully at the bottom of the firing chamber. Usually one large pot was placed in first, directly over the fire hole. Then smaller pots were stacked around that. The pots were stacked so that there was plenty of space around each one. Sherds could be placed between pots to allow more space for flames and smoke to pass through. On top of the large base bowl was placed a small pot sherd on which was placed 4 kernels of corn. This would provide clues about the temperature as the firing progressed. Finally, large sherds were used to cover up the pots to retain heat. Several strategically placed gaps were left in the cover sherds to allow flames and smoke to escape. One of those holes was always in the center of the stack so that they could look in and see those corn kernels. The fire was then started and allowed to build up heat very slowly. This gave the pots a chance to preheat slowly and reduce chances of breakage. After about 2 hours of slowly heating up, the corn would be puffed up and the pots and cover sherds would be starting to turn dark from carbon. At this point, the fuel would be increased. After another 2 hours of firing, the soot would be starting to burn off the cover sherds, and the corn would be turned to ash. After another hour of firing, the corn would be starting to melt into an ash glaze, and the soot would be burned away on the walls of the kiln up around 10 inches above the cover sherds. At this point, they were approaching the end of the firing, and they would watch the level that the soot was burned above the cover sherds to know when to stop the fire. They would place a ring of damp sand around the mouth of the firing chamber around this time. This would act as a sort of gasket when they smothered the fire. They also had ready a wet piece of plywood that was just the right size to cover the mouth of the firing chamber. When the soot was burned up over 12 inches above the cover sherds, that was their trigger to go into action. They would quickly place the wet piece of plywood over the mouth of the kiln and onto that wet sand, causing the smoke and flames to back up and go out the front of the firebox. This cover was only kept in place for a very brief time, over 1 minute, but less than 2. Then it was removed, and at the same moment that the cover was removed, all of the coals and fuel in the firing chamber were raked out of the kiln and extinguished. That was the end of the firing. It was only smothered for 1 minute. After that, the pots had access to ample oxygen while they cooled, but they would not re-oxidize. Paul wrote some notes of things that favor a good Mimbres black on white firing. Here they are. 1. Have 1 to 2 large to medium-sized bowls to loosen up the stack, not too many very small ones. 2. Use small sherds under rims to prop some bowls farther apart. 3. Make sure each bowl is placed so that some flames can reach it and move on. 4. Place covers so that most direct view of bowls from above is blocked, but leave plenty of spaces for flames to go out and up. 5. To avoid spots on white, keep fire towards the front of tunnel. When near the end of the firing, use only oak and place carefully to prevent sparks. 6. Don't stoke the fire too much at once. Lots of black smoke. 7. Allow to oxidize between stoking cycles only long enough to clean covers. 8. Use 1 to 2 inch diameter oak branches near the end of the firing. Not too many large pieces that last long. 9. Not too much fuel and smoke just before capping. And 10. Leave 4 holes around the edges of the top covers, which can be closed to adjust side to side and front to back flame flow. For most of the time they were using this kiln, the Thornburgs did not measure the temperature except what they could read by using the corn kernels and the soot level. But for a time, around 2004, they were using a thermocouple, so I can tell you that their firings generally reached between 900 and 1,000 degrees Celsius. That's between 1650 and 1830 Fahrenheit. Well, there you have it. Everything you need to know to reduction fire an adobe kiln. If you try this yourself, I'd be interested in hearing how it goes. To learn more about primitive kilns, check out this video right over here, where I built a primitive kiln in my backyard out of bricks back in 2021. Thanks for watching today. I'll catch you next time. There it is.